A little shameless advertising. I could not be more pleased than to be the Society's recipient of the Roger Trask Award for 2011, especially in regard to the theme of this year's conference, Federal History in Times of National Crisis and Change. The Society for History in the Federal Government is a good example of an organization formed in the crucible of crisis, the job shortage for trained historians in the 1970s. And that changed the way federal history and federal history offices were viewed from outside the government and from within. Personifying that change was Roger Trask, who embraced the role as the conscience and parliamentarian of the Society, prodding it to be more inclusive, more active in defending federal history programs, even as department budget constraints, congressional inquiries, and executive indifference threatened several historical programs in the 1980s and 90s. 3 decades ago, federal historians and their allies effected a change during that crisis, most notably the creation of the Society and the victory for archives independence from GSA. Why some 30 years and a generation of historians ago? The fundamental answer lies in the unemployment crisis that led many historians to accept positions with the federal government, seen at that time as an employer of last resort for historians coming out of PhD programs with few teaching prospects. That influx, I believe, created a critical mass of disaffected, underemployed professionals who tapped into the existing discontent of many federal historians, provoked by the second-class professional status placed on them by academic historians. Out of that combination emerged what then seemed like a revolutionary idea: a professional organization of historians promoting and practicing federal history. There was opposition. Such organizations like the Society and the National Council of Public History, founded at the same time by many of the same individuals, would, quote, balkanize the profession, the detractors warned. Of course, that did not happen, and the historical profession, in my non-disinterested view, as one present at the creation of both groups, I believe has been greatly strengthened. Yet the Society, too, became a scene of several skirmishes. Not quite outright battles between federal historians and those of us who worked as contractors over some of those same status issues that divided academic and non-academic historians. Initially, there was considerable discussion about the Society's name. Some wished it to be exclusive, proposing a society solely of federal historians. Others saw the organization as more inclusive, including, shudder, contractors, and of course, other people, independent scholars. In the end, the idea prevailed, much to Roger's urging, in favor of an organization consisting of those who sought to promote federal history generally rather than just federal employees. Roger Trask was keenly aware of that history, and when an editor of the Federalist refused to print information about the federal work being done by History Associates, claiming that, quote, the Society might lose its tax status as a nonprofit organization, unquote, if such information were included in the newsletter, Trask invoked the founding documents and ended that self-imposed restrictive policy at once. Nevertheless, while the sharp dichotomy in the historical profession among academics, federal historians, and professional practicing historians has eased, it has not disappeared. Faced today with another crisis, job or otherwise, how would the society perform? Would it react or would it lead? I don't know the answer, but as a strong believer in generational history, I do know the current generation of leadership will shape its own response. The incredible differences in communication methods, the internet, social networking sites such as Twitter and Facebook, and cell phones and email, ensure that crisis and change will be faster paced, if nothing more. Compare the events of Iran and the return of Khomeini in 1979 with those uprisings of the Arab world today over the past 6 months, and you will see the combined impact of youth, unemployment, dissatisfaction, and rapid communications. There are similarities with those for us who created the society in 1979. Most of the founders were in our mid to late 30s and early 40s. Many of us had endured the humbling experience of unemployment. We were frustrated with the lack of interest and concern from professional organizations, and federal historians operating largely in offices detached from and independent of one another rarely talked together. Suddenly, they found a voice. Importantly, most senior government historians did not oppose the movement. Leaders such as Richard Hewlett and Wayne Rasmussen encouraged but did not lead. That was for younger historians. In fact, I think we were all amazed to see how many showed up at that first conference in the fall of 1979. The numbers of historians working in federal history was striking. We didn't know they were all there. Perhaps this was our aha moment that something might be accomplished. And certainly those were the first stirrings of change. Indeed, change has been interesting over the 5 generations I've known people in my life. So many uncommon things are now commonplace. Consider that when my grandparents came into the world, it was a world lit only by fire. During my parents' lifetime, the automobile, telephone, penicillin, electricity, and with it, electrical power to run the radios, washing machines, vacuum cleaners, refrigerators, and even indoor plumbing and typewriters became commonplace. In my own generation, witnessed the spread of television, polio vaccine, birth control pills, transistors, mainframe computers, then desktop computers, then portable computers, then laptop computers. Boy, what have they done to our lives? Touch-tone phones, mobile phones, cell phones, and the internet, VCRs, CDs, and the beginning of the digital age. You remember the paperless office? How it was all going to put us out of business? Well, where is it now? Well, our own children and grandchildren are growing up in an increasingly electronic milieu. Electronic records, digital books, smartphones, and who knows what else will come along. Technological change happens so fast, it constantly tests our ability to keep up with it, to adjust our social patterns, to use it rather than to be abused by it, as evidenced, for example, in our increasing concern with privacy in a world made more accessible by technology. Yet historians must embrace these changes. Ironically, however, historians who make a career of studying change are often the most reluctant to change themselves. Nevertheless, to flourish, we need to design valued and useful history and historical programs. The age of federal historical offices operating in isolated environments is coming to an end. Amidst shrinking federal resources, federal historians and their allies must explore new ways to communicate the value and uses of history throughout the government. In short, we should welcome rather than hide from the challenging opportunities to reinvent the society so that it can play a positive and vital role in shaping the future of federal history. Although I did not realize it at the time, most of my professional life has been the product of adapting and changing the practice of history in periods of crisis. As Pete mentioned, I was a victim of the job crisis in the 1970s. No tenure, no job, a failure in my chosen profession. I confess that standing in an unemployment line was personally demeaning and both a change and a crisis in my own life. My response was not very well planned either. Rather, I stumbled into, for want of a better term, entrepreneurial history. So let me talk a bit about that crisis and change as they relate to the development of that enterprise, History Associates. You may or may not know about our evolution, but I believe that over the past 3 decades, we have changed some of the ways historians approach and do history. I was reminded by an article in the Washington Post a few weeks ago. 32 years ago this week was the accident at 3 Mile Island, and that led to changes throughout the world's nuclear power industry. The events following the massive earthquake and tsunami in Fukushima, Japan this month are poignant reminders of 3 Mile Island and my own transformation as an historian. Just as TMI changed the nuclear industry, so for me and many others did it change the historical profession. Let me explain. I'd been back in this country 6 weeks, just having completed a year as a Fulbright professor of American civilization in Japan, not up in Sendai, but south in Fukuoka and Kyushu, when I received a call from Jack Hall, who was then Dick Hewlett's assistant in the history division at the Department of Energy. Jack and I had been colleagues at Williams, and so he knew about my unemployment situation. Would you be interested in writing a history of the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident, he asked. We think that this is one of the most important events in the history of nuclear energy. A history? I countered. How can you write a history of a current event?